Montana Territory, July 1883, the church bell struck midnight as Delaney Whitlow ran barefoot down the dusty main road of Dry Creek, her calico dress torn at the hem, her breath sharp with panic. The town behind her burned with more than lantern light, it burned with judgment, with voices raised and fists clenched. She did not look back. She had not planned to run, not until tonight. But when Reverend Tolliver's wife screamed at her across the boarding house porch, calling her a liar and worse, the crowd gathered fast. Dry Creek had never been kind, but tonight it turned cruel. She pressed a hand to her ribs, where the bruises still ached from when Sheriff Holcomb shoved her into the jail wall 2 nights ago. All because she had spoken up. All because she had said no. She reached the edge of town and crossed the narrow bridge over the creek, tears stinging her eyes. Her carpetbag thudded against her hip, holding little more than a spare dress, a coin pouch, and the letter from her sister that she had read so many times the ink was nearly gone. The prairie opened wide in the moonlight. Nothing but sage and stars. Keep walking, Delaney, just keep walking. She had no plan, just away. Anywhere but here. A mile out, her legs gave. She collapsed near a lone cottonwood tree, hauling in gulps of dry air. Her fingers trembled as she covered her face and wept quiet, broken sobs that had waited too long to escape. That was when she heard the hooves. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering, unsure if it was friend or foe. But the rider did not shout, did not draw a gun, just slowed his horse as he approached. "Miss," the man said, voice low and steady. "You all right?" The moon lit his face as he dismounted. He was tall, lean, dust-covered. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his hat sat pushed back just enough to show tired eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked no older than 30, but carrying years in the set of his shoulders. Delaney wiped her face. "I am fine." He glanced at her bleeding foot. "You are not." She looked down and saw the cut across her heel. Gravel. She had not even felt it through the panic. He stepped closer but slow, like he knew not to spook her. "Name's Hollis Nolan. I have a cabin about a mile west. You can rest there if you want." Delaney hesitated. "I will not ask questions," Hollis added. "You are out here at midnight with tears and no shoes. That tells me enough." Her throat tightened. "Delaney Whitlow." He nodded once, then reached gently for her bag. "Come on." She let him help her onto his horse, and he walked beside her, his hand steady on the reins. They did not speak. The cabin was tucked between 2 hills, weathered but clean. A lantern glowed inside. Hollis opened the door and motioned for her to enter. "You hungry?" She shook her head. "All right, sit then. Let me wrap that foot." She sat in the wooden chair near the fireplace while he fetched a basin and cloth. His touch was careful, his hands sure. He did not speak while he cleaned the wound, but his eyes flicked to hers now and then. "I am sorry," she whispered. For showing up like this, for bringing whatever trouble I am carrying." "You did not bring anything," he said quietly. "You left it behind." She watched him tear a strip from a clean shirt and tie it around her foot. "Why were you awake?" He looked at her a moment before answering. "Could not sleep, been that way a while." Delaney reached down and touched the bandage. "Thank you." He stood and poured her a cup of water. "You can take the bed, I will sleep out here. I cannot take your room." "You can," he said plainly. "And you will." That night she lay on the edge of a stranger's bed, staring at the ceiling beams, her heart still racing but her body still for the first time in days. Outside she heard Hollis shift in his chair, the soft creak of wood, then silence. Morning filtered in through the cracks. Delaney stepped outside into the crisp dawn, the prairie quiet. Hollis was already up, splitting wood. "Good morning," he called without looking over. She stepped onto the porch. "You live out here alone?" "Most of the time." She studied him. "You are kind." His axe paused mid-air. "I am not." "Just decent." She smiled, just a little. "That is rare." He set the axe down and met her gaze. "You have somewhere to go." "My sister in Fort Benton. She wrote last spring, said I should come stay, but I never had the nerve." "You have it now," she nodded. "I can take you." She hesitated. "I cannot ask that." "You did not," I offered. Her eyes stung again. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone should have, long before now." They left that afternoon after she had rested and he had packed supplies. The ride was long, the land wide and golden. They camped under the stars that night. She sat across the fire from him, knees drawn to her chest. "Why could you not sleep?" she asked, voice soft. He looked into the flames. "War, then Texas, then more things I do not like talking about," she nodded. "Same," he glanced over. "You from Dry Creek?" "For the last 2 years. Before that, Kansas. Before that, nowhere really." "Someone there hurt you," she nodded once. "He was respected, I was not." He did not pry. Just passed her a tin of beans and said, "You are safe now." She looked at him, his quiet strength, the way he never looked at her like she was broken. "I believe you." He smiled, slow and honest, and she felt something in her chest ease. They reached Fort Benton 4 days later. Delaney's sister was gone, moved east with her new husband 2 months earlier. The house was boarded up. She stood on the porch, stunned. "You still want to stay here?" Hollis asked gently. She shook her head. "No." "Then come back with me, to the cabin." He met her eyes. "To wherever you want." She stared at him, heart thudding. "I do not want to be alone anymore," she said. "You do not have to be." She stepped closer. "You are the first person who has not looked at me like I am ruined." He reached for her hand. "You are not ruined. You are brave." Her eyes filled again, but this time it was not from fear. "I want to go home," she whispered. "Then let us go." And they did. Back to the cabin, back to the quiet hills, where she planted flowers near the porch, where he built a second chair so they could sit side by side in the evenings, and where, one night weeks later, she reached for his hand and said, "I love you." He squeezed her fingers, eyes warm. "I have loved you since the cottonwood tree," and neither of them were alone again. By early August, the prairie had turned to gold and ochre, the grasses tall and whispering in the wind. Delaney stood by the stream that cut behind Hollis's property, her skirts gathered in one hand, the other holding a bucket half filled with water. A willow tree leaned over the bank, its slender branches trailing the current. She watched minnows dart through the shallows, her mind quiet for the first time in a long while. Behind her, the sound of boots on packed dirt made her turn. "I was about to come looking," Hollis said, a basket tucked under one arm. "Figured you wandered off with all my potatoes." She raised an eyebrow. "You plant 5 rows, I took 3. He grinned, lopsided, not showy. "Then I will starve come winter." "Guess I will have to share my biscuits then." He set the basket down, and she saw he had packed bread wrapped in cloth, a wedge of cheese, and early apples from the tree near the shed. They sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, knees nearly touching, the late sun catching the edge of his jaw. She bit into an apple and spoke without looking over. "You ever go into town?" "Only when I need to." He unwrapped the bread, tore it in half, and handed her a piece. "Too many folks there that ask questions I do not feel like answering." She nodded slowly. "I know the kind." He glanced at her sideways. "You miss anything about your old life?" She chewed in silence for a moment, then said, "I miss knowing where I fit." Even if it wasn't safe. His brow creased, but he didn't press. "I used to think quiet meant peace, but it can turn heavy when there's too much of it. You get lonely out here." He picked at a splinter in the edge of the basket. "More than I'd ever say to most folks." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not most folks to me." They let the silence stretch, not uncomfortable now, just full. She leaned back on her hands, squinting at the sky. "What did you do before all this?" "Drove cattle. Worked a line crew for the railroad near Fort Keogh. Got into trouble south of the Yellowstone once. Spent a year fixing it." She glanced at him. "Fixing how?" "Keeping my mouth shut, doing hard work, paying folks back." She studied the way he spoke, plain, not ashamed, just facts. "I used to teach small children," she said. "Letters, numbers, how to hold a pencil without snapping it. There was a boy named Elias, couldn't sit still for 5 heartbeats, but he'd recite every page of Robinson Crusoe by heart if I let him." "You miss them," she nodded. "I miss being needed for something good." He nudged her boot gently with his. "You're needed here." She looked down at their feet, then up at him. "By who?" His voice was steady. "By me." The breeze shifted, lifting a strand of her hair against her cheek. She didn't move it. His eyes followed the movement. "I've never known what it meant to belong," she said quietly. "Not really, not in a way that didn't cost me." "It shouldn't have to," he said. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes on the water. "I used to think if I just tried harder, people might see me as worth something." He didn't answer right away, just reached over, picked up her hand from her lap and held it in his. "I see you." She looked at him, and the air between them felt still, not fragile solid like earth after rain. Later, when the sun dipped low and shadows pulled long across the grass, they walked back to the cabin side by side, her empty bucket swinging between them. She didn't ask whether she'd stay another day. He didn't need to offer. Inside, she dried herbs near the stove while he cleaned his tools. The world outside could have been 1,000 miles off. As the fire dimmed and the oil lantern hissed faintly, she looked over her shoulder. "Hollis," he looked up. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He rested his hands on the table. "Only every day." She turned fully toward him. "And what do you see when you do?" He crossed the room slowly, stopping just short of her. "You, mostly," her breath caught. "That's a good answer. Truth usually is." She reached for his hand again, fingers threading through his. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He bent his head, pressed his forehead gently to hers. "Then we'll build something here, slow, strong." "In the dark," she smiled, not with her mouth, with her whole face. And for the first time since she was a child, she believed peace wasn't just possible. It was already beginning. By early September, the wind carried the edge of oncoming frost. The cottonwoods along the creek had begun their slow turn to yellow, and the mornings held the kind of chill that stayed in the bones if you didn't move. Delaney woke early now, before the sun pushed over the hills, and fed the stove with pine kindling before Hollis stirred from his cot by the hearth. That morning, she stood at the washbasin behind the cabin, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing linens with lye soap and river water. Her hands were raw from the cold, but she didn't complain. She liked the ache of work that built something. Hollis appeared beside her, a canvas sack in one hand. "Rancher named Bellamy's got a busted yoke and a wagon stuck beyond the bluff. Sent word with a rider. I told him I'd take a look." She wrung out a towel and hung it over the line. "How far out?" "Half a day if the trail's dry. I'll be back by dark." She nodded, then watched the way his fingers lingered on the strap of his sack. "You want me to pack something?" He gave her a look that held warmth without weight. "Already done." She dried her hands on her apron. "Be careful, always." She didn't kiss him. Not because she didn't want to, but because they hadn't yet, and she wasn't ready to break the quiet rhythm they'd found unless it came honest. After he left, the cabin felt larger than it should have. She kept herself busy, shelled beans, mended the hem of her second dress, swept dust from the corners with a bundle of dried sagebrush tied with twine. Still, by late afternoon, the silence grew thick enough to press against her chest. She stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself despite the sun. Hoofbeats approached from the south, and a boy no older than 12 rode up bareback, his knees gripping the ribs of a sway-backed mare. "You the lady stays with Hollis Nolan?" he asked, panting like he'd ridden hard. Delaney stepped off the porch. "I am. What's wrong?" "Bellamy sent me." Said Nolan took a spill off a ridge. "Horse spooked. He's hurt some, not bad, but they can't get the wagon loose. He needs help getting back." She didn't ask how bad. She just grabbed a shawl, slung Hollis's second rifle across her back, and saddled the mule they'd been feeding up for winter hauling. The boy led her half a mile past the bluff Hollis had mentioned. She found him sitting against a fallen log, one leg stretched out straight, boot unlaced and dark with dirt. She dismounted and crouched beside him. "Where?" "Ankle. Rolled it under me when I landed." "Feels like something tore loose." She pulled his pant leg up gently. It was swollen, bone intact but angry red. "Did you hit your head?" "No, just my pride." She looked at him with sharp eyes. "You should have sent for me sooner. Didn't want to worry you. You failed." He laughed low in his throat, then winced. "I'll ride behind you if you can stand the weight. Mule's stronger than she looks." They made their way back slow. She kept one hand on his thigh to steady him as he swayed behind her. His breath was hot against her neck, and once when they crossed a shallow ravine, his hand caught hers and didn't let go until they were on even ground. Later, as she bound his ankle tight with clean strips and propped it with folded cloth, he watched her with something different in his eyes. Not gratitude, not only that, something settled, certain. "You didn't hesitate," he said softly. "Didn't need to." She stood, wiped her hands on her skirt. "You need rest, no walking for days." He reached out, caught the hem of her sleeve gently. "You're not afraid of much anymore." "I'm still afraid," she said, voice low. "I just don't let it stop me." He kept his gaze on her. "I want to ask you something." She waited. "Not now. Not while I'm laid up like a fool, but soon." She didn't press. Just nodded once, then turned to stoke the fire. That night, she moved her bedding to the floor near his cot, not close enough to touch, but closer than the space between them had ever been. He fell asleep quickly, breath steady, and she lay awake listening to the wind shift through the trees. Just after midnight, she rose and stepped outside. The stars were thick overhead, the sky so wide it hurt to look at. She stood barefoot in the cold dust, her arms wrapped around her chest, and for the first time in years she felt a kind of belonging that didn't come with a price. Behind her, the door creaked open. Hollis leaned against the frame, blanket draped over one shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. "I am," she said. "I just needed to see the sky." He stepped forward, limping slow. "You always do this when the world gets quiet, only when I can stand still long enough to notice." He reached for her hand without asking, and she let him. Their fingers laced together, warm despite the wind. "I don't want to wait anymore," he said. She looked up at him, the starlight catching in his dark eyes. "Then don't." His hand tightened around hers, and they didn't speak again. They just stood there, side by side, as the night held them steady. By late September, the light had turned softer, slanting longer across the hills. Frost clung to the grass at dawn, and the mule's breath came out in soft clouds as Delaney led it from the lean-to. Hollis leaned against the porch rail, his wrapped ankle resting on a stool, a mug of coffee balanced in his hand. "You planning to run off with my best beast?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. Delaney adjusted the lead rope. "I'm heading to the Weller place, Mrs. Weller's due soon, and her oldest came limping to the cabin yesterday saying she could use a woman's hands." Hollis took a slow sip. "You sure you don't want me to ride out with you?" She looked at his leg. "You'd make it 10 yards and pass out in the dirt." He smiled behind the rim of the mug. "Fair." She climbed into the saddle and turned toward him. "I'll be back before dusk. You take it easy." He lifted 2 fingers in a lazy salute, and she rode out. The Weller homestead sat in a low hollow ringed by cottonwoods, a good hour's ride northeast. Delaney spent the day boiling cloth, setting up the birthing room, and showing the Weller girl how to mash yarrow root into paste. The baby hadn't come yet, but the signs were close. Mrs. Weller gripped Delaney's hand at one point and whispered, "You've got calm in you. The kind that steadies a house." Delaney didn't know what to say to that, so she only nodded. She made it back as the sun dipped low, the sky streaked orange and violet. The scent of hickory smoke met her halfway down the slope. Hollis had dragged a chair onto the porch and set a pot to simmer over the fire pit. "It's rabbit," he called as she dismounted, "and it's probably overcooked." She handed him the bridle. "You're lucky I'm too hungry to judge." They ate beside the fire, knees brushing under the table Hollis had hauled out from the cabin. The flames danced in his eyes, and his face looked softer in the low light, less guarded, more certain. "Mrs. Weller's close," Delaney said, tearing a strip from the biscuit he'd made. "I'll need to head back when it starts." Hollis nodded. "You think you'll want to stay on after that? With them, I mean?" She tilted her head. "Why would I do that?" "Well," he said slowly, "you've got more use there than out here patching my stubborn self together." She leaned back slightly. "That sound like you asking me to go?" He met her gaze. "That sound like I don't know how to say I can't picture this place without you in it." She swallowed, the biscuit dry in her throat now. "Then say that instead." He set his fork down. "I don't need to think about it, Delaney. I want you here for good." The fire popped. Somewhere out in the dark, a bird called once, then went quiet. "You never asked what I wanted," she said, not unkindly. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She stood and crossed to the edge of the porch, arms folded as she looked out at the dark hills. "I want a place I don't have to leave to feel safe. I want a person who doesn't flinch when I speak my own mind. I want to wake up and not brace for something to go wrong. You offer that here." He stood, slower, careful of his ankle. "Then stay." She turned toward him. "You said you wanted to ask me something, back when you were laid up." "I did." "Was it this?" He stepped closer. "It was more." She waited. "I want to build something with you, not just a roof and a fire, a life." "I'm not good at promises," she said, voice steady. "I've never had one kept long enough to believe in them." "I won't promise you peace every day," he said, "but I'll never leave you wondering where you stand." She didn't answer right away, just watched the way his hand hovered near hers without touching. "I want to plant in spring," she said. "Vegetables, maybe a few apple starters. I want to teach the neighbor kids how to write their names. I want to learn how to mend a saddle without breaking the needle," he smiled. "All right. And I want to do it beside you." His hand closed gently around hers. "You will." They stood like that a long time, the fire dying down to embers behind them, her head resting against his shoulder, the porch creaking once beneath their feet. No more words were needed. The wind was colder that night, but inside the cabin it was warm and steady. The first heavy snow came early that October, blanketing the hills in quiet. The wind had stilled for once, and the world outside the cabin held that dense hush Delaney had once only heard in churches. Inside, the fire burned low, and she stood near the stove, rolling dough between her palms, her fingers dusted in flour. The quiet wasn't empty now, it was full with the rhythm of shared days and the weight of something steady. Hollis sat near the window, carving the handle of a spade he'd split weeks back. His ankle had healed enough for short walks, though the cold made it ache. He didn't complain, he never had, but she noticed the way he paused before each step, how he'd press one hand into his thigh to keep balance. She never offered help aloud, just moved beside him when needed, her presence quiet and sure. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked without looking up, her voice even. He set the blade down slowly. "I have." She turned, one brow lifted. "Before?" "No," she waited. "I figured I didn't have enough of anything to offer, until now." She wiped her hands on her apron. "You still don't know if I'd say yes." He stood, crossing the room with the uneven rhythm his leg now carried. "I think you would. But I'll ask proper." She leaned back against the table, arms loosely crossed. "I don't need a ring, Hollis. I know, but I want to give you one." He opened the drawer under the workbench and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a brass ring, plain but polished, with a single line etched around the band. She took it in her hand, turning it slowly. "Where'd you get it?" "Traded a man in Fort Benton for the brass, did the rest myself." She ran her thumb over the edge. "What's the line mean?" "Nothing." "Or everything, just wanted something that circles back." She stepped closer, the ring resting in her palm. "You asking me now?" "I am." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then I'll say yes." He let out a slow breath through his nose, and she saw his shoulders ease in that way they did only when he let himself be seen. They married 3 days later, with the Weller family and 2 neighbors standing at the edge of the frozen creek. Mrs. Weller, due any hour, pressed a quilt into Delaney's hands afterward, saying no one ought to start a marriage without something stitched for warmth. The ceremony was short, spoken over steaming mugs of cider and the cries of a red-winged hawk far overhead. That winter settled hard and fast. They kept to the cabin mostly, sharing the work evenly. He showed her how to check the traps without losing fingers to frost, and she taught him to read by lamplight a chapter each evening, his voice low and slow, the words thick in his throat but clear. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters and their supper cooled on the table behind them, Hollis set his book aside and looked at her from where he'd settled on the floor near the fire. "I used to think I wasn't made for much more than surviving." She tucked her legs beneath her, watching the way the firelight danced on the lines beside his mouth. And now I think maybe I was just waiting to find the place I could do more than that. She reached across the space between them, her fingers brushing his wrist. You've built something here, Hollis. We both have. He turned his hand over, catching hers in his. Then let's keep building, she nodded. We will. By spring, the ground had softened, and Delaney planted root vegetables along the southern stretch where the sun held longest. The Weller baby arrived healthy, a girl with her mother's eyes, and Delaney rode over once a week to help with feeding and chores. Hollis added a new beam to the barn, and together they patched the roof with fresh shaved shakes. They didn't speak about past hurts anymore. Not because they were forgotten, but because they no longer defined the space between them. The quiet they shared now was different, earned and full, like the soil they turned together, the kind that held promise. By the time summer came round again, the apple starters had taken root, and Delaney stood barefoot beneath their leaves, a soft swell rounding her belly. Hollis came up behind her, pressing a hand to her waist, his thumb slow against the fabric of her dress. You think it'll be a girl or a boy? He asked. She leaned back into him slightly. I think it'll be loved. He kissed the curve of her neck just once, then rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood that way as the sun dropped behind the hills, the sky lit gold and lavender. The cabin waited behind them, smoke curling from the stovepipe, laundry swaying on the line. There was no rush, no fear, just the life they'd made, unfolding slow and certain, and they stayed through the seasons, through every harvest and storm, not because it was easy, but because it was theirs. Because they had chosen it, and each other, always.